Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I'm Chloe Tetra, the health coach here with ReadyCare. For this morning, we're going to be chatting about the brain fog that lands on people around the 3 p.m. slot and fighting for your life in around that time to focus and get your cognitive circuits firing. So what I'm going to be covering today is essentially around focus. It's looking at the science of eating for focus. So I'll chat a little bit around just your kind of run-of-the-mill cognitive landscape. I'll touch a little bit on ADHD and kind of give a few foods that may be helpful now. Of course, I'll be taking kind of a low-carb approach, but I'll give a fairly kind of broad overview of the energy mechanism. So we're looking at foods that will fuel both energy in the brain and food that will basically foods that will fuel, if I could say it now, we'd be winning, foods that will fuel cognitive aspects. So if you're somebody that does struggle with kind of lulls around the afternoon period, you are part of a large percentage, so 79% to be exact, of adults in the UK and Ireland are reported to have work-related stresses leading to poor sleep and daytime fatigue. Now, that is a huge recipe for brain fog, foggy mind, that kind of catch-all term that basically means memory's not working the way that you want it to, thoughts are not coming to you the way that you'd like them to, and everything's just a little bit kind of fighting in the mud to reach the thoughts. So the sleep aspect and the stress aspect of it are looked at, and we've touched on those, and they're looked at quite a bit, but the food aspect of things, or nutrition, is actually very often overlooked. And it's a very, very crucial part of the puzzle. So unhealthy eating habits, so think of things like high sugar processed foods, they're estimated to cost UK and Ireland around 116 billion with a B in lost productivity each year. Now, I'd love to know, I'd love to know the parameters for that study, but it was part of a broad study done across a 2 to 3 year period. So one of the big reasons is the effect of diet on our concentration and our mental energy. So we'll have a look at how low carb can help in boosting that focus, boosting that cognitive, mental clarity and resilience. So the blood sugar aspect of things, let's start as we always do. So the blood sugar roller coaster essentially is what you're trying to avoid. So it's the spikes and crashes in blood sugar and blood glucose levels that many of us experience throughout our day. So when you eat a meal that's high in refined carbohydrates or sugar, so things like breads, potatoes, pastas, whole grains, which is there as well, bananas, which is there as well, which I know a lot of people would think, they're great foods to start to bring in if you're looking to boost your focus, but we'll chat around maybe why it might not be. So any of these foods, they'll cause a sharp spike in your blood glucose. So your body responds then by releasing insulin, which is your hormone that helps move glucose out of the blood and into the cells. So we often just think of insulin as just something that people with diabetes might have, but all of us have insulin. So those big spikes are then followed. I probably need to look after my own cognitive health now this morning. They're followed by a crash, essentially. And it's that crash that makes you feel sluggish, it makes you feel shaky, it makes you feel zoned out. So why does this matter overall workplace and life? So new research has shown that large glucose fluctuations are linked to slower and less accurate cognitive processing. So basically when your blood sugars all over the place, your brain's processing speed and attention can stumble hugely. On the flip side, if you keep your blood sugars nice and stable, they don't have to run super low. We don't want them to run super, super low, just nice and stable. Essentially, that will help to maintain consistent energy. So I found that 26% of people were more fatigued when they're eating a diet high in refined carbs and added sugars. And to be honest with you, that's something that I see consistently when I'm working with clients is they'll say, oh, I get very sleepy after my meals, particularly things that do contain rice, potatoes, pastas that we think of as energy food. Now, we'll start to get into the nitty-gritty of it a little bit more, but more oftentimes when foods are heralded, packaged, marketed, and labeled as energy foods, oftentimes what that means is a 1-for-1 on glucose, because our brains, if we're not part of a kind of low carb way of eating, our brains run on glucose predominantly. So packaging can say, this will give you more energy, when all it means is there is more glucose in this. Things like flapjacks, which are just bunches of oats with loads of sugar added. All of those oats are going to break down into glucose. If you start your day with a big old bowl of porridge, you can find that you can get that little crash, because of course that porridge, part of the carbohydrate family, they will all convert down into glucose in your system. They will cause the spike, they will cause the crash. So how can you avoid the roller coaster? So that's where the kind of low carb approach really comes in. So I don't mean no carb, which is the caveat here. I don't mean no carb. It's a reduction in things like your refined breads, sugars, pastries, excessive starchy foods. So again, that's your bananas. It's your anything that's grainy. All of these guys, starchy vegetables, potatoes, beautiful potatoes anyway, beautiful, but unfortunately they're part of this as well, which is why I stress low, not no carb. So the core benefit is that it helps to keep your blood sugars and insulin levels steadier throughout the day. So instead of your energy spiking and crashing, you get more sustained release of fuel. So a lot of people that will adopt this low carb approach, or even a ketogenic diet, which is a very, very low and higher fat approach, they report a marked improvement in mental clarity and focus. And this is something that typically when I'm working with people, I ask them on the second session, after they've had a chance to try it out for about a week, I say, how are you feeling? Have you noticed any changes in your energy? It's very, very common for people to say, I used to go for a kind of sit down or a nap in the afternoons, I presume not at work. And I'm just finding that I don't have to do that. So it's not that you're kind of jumping around like, who's your man in Winnie the Pooh? Tigger. It's not that you're jumping around like Tigger all of a sudden. It just means that where you were getting very noticeable peaks and troughs of your focus, energy, and cognitive function in your day, that's not happening anymore. So a 2024 study found that individuals on a ketogenic diet reported feeling significantly more alert and calm. They had a higher self-rated alertness and if I could say this, contentness, happiness, why did I say that instead? Which is a huge sign that their blood sugars are nice and regulated. So crucially, eating a low-carb diet can help to build what we call cognitive resilience, which you've probably heard 100,000 million times. And that basically refers to your brain's ability to perform well under various conditions, sometimes stressful, sometimes long work hours, or even as you're beginning to age. It's to keep that cognitive resilience there. So by training your body to rely less on constant carb intake, because as you crash, what goes up must come down, must come back up again. And that roller coaster, that crashing and needing to go back up, excuse me, I'll just take a drink of water there. Water with multivitamins. What that will create is a necessity to constantly fuel with carbohydrates. And that's when we see carbohydrate addiction come into things, or people that feel that they need to eat all day long because they're exhausted. That's the carbohydrate fueling, right? Your brain gets more reliable, sustainable energy from low carb. So you can stay sharp even late in the day. Oftentimes you'll find that you don't need to eat as much because you're out of that kind of loop and cycle. there's promising evidence that translates this into real cognitive benefits. So, for example, researchers at Johns Hopkins University conducted a pilot trial with older adults experiencing mild memory issues. And they found that a high-fat, low-carb diet led to small-ish but measurable improvements in memory and brain functions over a period of 3 months. Now, those are people with early signs of cognitive decline. And the fact that the diet made a difference in their mental performance is a huge testament to the impact of food on the brain. So the connection with carbohydrates as well, particularly for those that may have loved ones in your family showing very, very early signs of dementia, very early signs of memory lapses. Type 2 is your diabetes, and there's a name for Alzheimer's out there that's actually type 3. It's kind of name for it out there because of the link to insulin and blood sugars and how interwoven they are. There's some fantastic studies out there if you're interested and looking to mind some people or yourself just with regards food aspects. So how does it work and why does it make such a difference? So peeking under the hood, what's happening in there? So if you consider that the brain is an energy miser, it's like Scrooge, and it's like a hungry ghost. I was listening to a thing about that Japanese concept of hungry ghosts yesterday. Anyway, I won't go there. I'll come back here. So it's always looking for fuel. It's always looking for energy. It makes up only 2% of our body weight, but uses about 20% of our energy. And I would say even more. And that's down to the constant processing that's happening. Even if you've probably noticed this, if you're stressed, if you're ruminating, if you're anxious, and you're having racing thoughts, you can come out of the day feeling absolutely wiped out and probably reaching for something like a bag of crisps or something to bring up your sugar levels. When people say to me, I do find myself reaching for a bag of crisps is always the one. It's not always the one, but it's more often than not the one. I go through a list of particular things. Are you stressed? Are you tired? Are you this? Are you what? Because what we can read as this compulsion, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? You're following a signal that's telling you, I need to fuel back up again. Sometimes when we're overthinking, when we're anxious, all of these different things, that uses a huge amount of energy. So normally the brain's main fuel is glucose or sugar, same thing as we've mentioned, but it is entirely capable of running on what is wrong with my speaking today? An alternative fuel source. So prior to the agricultural revolution, we didn't all just drop dead instantly. There's no necessity for us as human beings to constantly feed on grains, to constantly feed on carbohydrates. Evolutionarily speaking, that is a fairly recent phenomenon. So what did we do before that? Fats, proteins. When carb intake is very, very low, your body shifts to burning fat for energy, and the liver produces what's called ketoned bodies. So like beta hydroxybutyrate. So ketones are a very, very, very powerful brain fuel. They're fantastic. In fact, brain imaging shows that ketones produced during low carb eating or fasting. Now, these are different from ketoacidosis. It's a whole different mechanism. The only thing it's going to share here is that word. So just if there's any confusion there happening, totally different process. So ketones are produced during low carb eating or fasting as well. So usually at the 12 to 14 hour mark is when people start to produce ketones, sometimes more, sometimes less, everybody's different, etc. And they can be used as an alternative fuel source for your brain. Your neurons actually thrive on ketones. Research suggests, I don't know what's happening. Research suggests that ketones may even make brain cell energy production more efficient. You're going to get a flashback here from secondary school. So studies have found that ketone metabolism can enhance mitochondrial efficiency in brain cells. And as we all remember, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. So that means that your brain might generate energy with less oxidative stress. So we don't want oxidative stress. That's why people talk about antioxidants that you find in foods as a good thing. So when you're using ketones versus glucose, which could contribute to clearer thinking and neuroprotection. It's no coincidence that ketogenic diets were first used to treat epilepsy. So that's how they all kind of, they were researched originally, was to treat epilepsy. Very, very cognitive, neuroprotective. So another key mechanism is insulin and blood flow. High carb meals lead to repeated insulin spikes. So over time, if someone becomes insulin resistant, which bingo card, I mention at each chat, the body cells, including brain cells, respond less effectively to insulin. So beyond just managing your glucose levels, insulin also plays huge roles in the brain, including effects on neurotransmitters. So that's coming back into that type 3 that I mentioned, and that link in with dementia, Alzheimer's disease. It's thought to impair, insulin resistance is thought to impair dopamine signaling in the brain. So have our dopamine signal happens. The dopamine, if you think of it as, it's what gets us from here to there, right? It's the thing that makes us want to do something. So potentially leading to motivational deficits and even affecting moods. Dopamine is tied to motivation, it's tied to focus, it's tied to reward, right? It's our little slot machine. It's what keeps us sat at the slot machine going, this time it will be different. You can substitute the slot machine for any individual in your life or any activities. It's like, this time will be different. Dopamine's at play here, lads. So essentially, it's the brain's attention currency. So we're looking at focus, dopamine is playing a huge, huge role. When insulin resistance alters that dopamine pathway, people can feel more lethargic, unmotivated, depressed. So it says that essentially a diet that keeps insulin levels nice and lower and steady. Remember, I'm not saying you need to be at zero here, because you need insulin. But as long as it's kept low and steady, it preserves healthier dopamine function, which brings me on to ADHD. So let's talk about a smaller group, but that affects, actually quite an awful lot of people. Firstly, so people with attention deficit disorder, or even people who just will describe themselves as being a bit scattered, right? You don't necessarily have to have it written on paper that you lack focus to know that you're somebody who lacks focus and is a little bit of a scatterbrain. Mea culpa. So managing ADHD is very, very complex and typically would involve, a mixture of therapy, coaching, lifestyle, behavioral adjustments, medication for some. But the food and lifestyle plays a huge, huge part. One aspect is that the blood sugar swings can exacerbate that inattention and irritability. Anyone, whether they've ADHD or not, can get cranky, unfocused when they're hungry. You're not you when you're hungry, etc. When they're crashing, essentially, after a sugar high. So when you're smoothing those ups and downs out, that low-carb diet might reduce distractions coming from your internal signalers, like energy dips. So there is emerging research examining ketogenic diets for neurological, neurodevelopmental conditions. So I always think it's funny here, but an animal study on rats where they're looking to do an ADHD study on rats. I just think it's funny because it's like, how do you figure out which rats have ADHD? But look, that's just my own brain. Showed a marked reduction in hyperactivity and impulsivity comparable to the effects of ADHD medications. What they did is they basically switched the rats' brain energy source from carbs to ketones, and there was a huge reduction in their hyperactivity and impulsivity. I just think like anyway, I'm just picturing impulsive rats. So even more to the point, the ketone fed rats had increased expression of dopamine receptors and other proteins related to dopamine signaling in the brain. So in plainer terms, that basically means that their brain chemistry shifted hugely in a way that would better support focus and mood, like Pinky and the Brain. They became the brain. While it is an animal model, and I'm making a little bit of fun because I'm just finding the image of it a bit silly, but the research is very sturdy on it. So it's very telling on the impact that the ketones will have overall, and we see it across the board on humans. Like admin reveal, I myself have ADHD, and prior to medicating, I found it, which is the route that I chose to go down. That might not be everybody's cup of tea, but prior to that, I managed my symptoms with very low carb diets, and I found a huge improvement. Now, if you consider people that are experiencing burnout or chronic stress as a separate group, or sometimes same group, I mean, you might have been there yourself, or know somebody in your life that is currently experiencing a huge chronic stress period with burnout. So feeling emotional, mentally exhausted, and threshold of their capacity just can focus on right here, right now. And even then, I'll give it my best shot, but that's all I have. So that kind of bringing in of capacity. So in burnout, your stress hormones are often in huge overdrive and energy reserves are very low. It's easy in those moments to reach for that kind of bag of crisps, curly whirly, whatever it might be, or caffeine, actually, for a little bit of a jolt. But that can backfire hugely because, again, you're going to be entering, I think roller coaster is the wrong term. It's more like a merry-go-round where, you go up, you go down. Well, that is a roller coaster, actually. But you're in this kind of cycle where you always have to fuel it. You will always feel the crash afterwards. And oftentimes, if you're burnt out, chronically stressed, that means your cortisol levels are up. So it can destabilize not only your moods, but your sleeping. Your blood sugar is creeping up, means your insulin is going to creep up, which means that metabolically, you might push on a little bit of weight, have even greater difficulty with focus and attention. So if at all avoidable, it's a better route to not really go there. So the more stable energy sources will be things that are proteins, right? If it swam, crawled, flew on this earth, if you are not a vegetarian, proteins, animal sources are absolutely brilliant. You can get vegetarian protein sources, of course, tofu, tempeh, and all of the kind of bean substitutes, all of these kind of things. They're going to be absolutely crucial. High fat foods are friends. Fats are not foes. Your brain is a massive lump of fat. It needs good fats. It needs omega-3 type of fats. That'll be things like salmon. It'll be things like nuts, seeds. It'll be most oily fish. If you don't like oily fish, you can always go down the supplement route. If you can go for things like chia seeds, they're a huge, fantastic source of omega-3. Now, you can add these things in, but the most important thing is to start to reduce the foods that are causing the issues, right? And that might seem very oversimplistic, but try it out. See how you get on reducing your carbohydrates over the period of a week, and jot down for yourself, how is your mood? Probably terrible for the first day, I have to admit it, because our brains are little junkies as well as misers, God love them. How is your mood that week? By day 3, how's your mood now? How's your energy levels? It's very normal that they start to stabilize. You won't get the peaks and troughs. You won't get the crashes. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock crash is not an actual thing, right? That is a normalization of an abnormal physiological response to sell us granola bars. It's not a normal thing. So swap those refined carbohydrates for fiber-rich alternatives. Fiber, great stuff, right? You're looking at all of the different above ground vegetables. Perfect. If you can't give up a potato, you don't have to. It just means that once a week is better than every day. Cutting back on the breads, cutting back on the rice, and really looking at having whole foods as best as possible. So single ingredient foods, basically nothing that has like a gazillion ingredients that are packed with things that no human being can pronounce. Keeping the fats high, so avocados, olive oil, good quality cheeses, good quality chia seeds, good quality flax seeds, and you can incorporate them in whatever way makes sense to you. Prioritizing proteins and avoiding starchy foods, right? I'll run out of time now, as I usually do. So I hope you found this helpful. And any questions, please pop them into the chat section and comment section. I love to hear them. Apologies about my stumbling words for today. And I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day and find your focus peak mode. We'll see you next week, guys. Bye now.